Hey, Josh.
Hey, man.
Sorry, we're still setting up here a little bit.
Yep, no worries.
All right, Josh, we'll start you out here with the inception of screens there. That's awesome.
Hello. Hello.
So there's not much to follow along with for this part, which is why I put up that GitHub repo. So there's a starter and a finished product in there that you guys can clone and just kind of compare the final to the starter and move along as you want to. But it's just like a simple scaffold. Angular has one too that I linked to in the documents here. But we're just going to kind of go over basics today. Mostly Angular, some TypeScript stuff, and then a couple demos on the CLI and Angular in general. So just reiterating the topics, we'll see what's new with Angular since AngularJS. Go over the style guide just a little bit, any changes or overview basics that John Papa put together for us, and then some demos. We'll touch on the CLI, dependency injection, components, services, and a little bit of the router, really basic stuff on most of that to get us started. But and take some questions, maybe. I'm still learning too as all this goes, so try not to stump me, but if I don't know it, I'll say I'll get back to you, and hopefully I'll get back to you. All right, so what's new? The big one right out of the gate is TypeScript. Since Angular 1, Google has actually officially adopted TypeScript as a programming language, which is like huge because they are kind of the know-all be-all of who's writing code. You can still use regular JavaScript with the ES6, just won't be cool. The other big thing is the CLI. That is like one of my favorite parts. I know a lot of people that got onto Angular 2 early on didn't like it because it was a little, they were working out kinks still. And then components are real things now. It's not just like an idea of component-based programming. A thing is called a component in Angular. So the other easy thing to notice that you'll see right away is the syntax, and that's Angular syntax, not talking about TypeScript, but the bindings are different to one way, data flow. So I think the brackets here are data to view, braces or whatever they are view to data, and then both are two-way binding. The other things that changed are ng4. You've now got the star ng4 and star ngIf rather than ng-if and ng-repeat. Just a couple things to look for. Those are the things that really like stuck out to me as this. I used what they used to be a lot, so I have to learn the new stuff. Yeah. All right, so looking at TypeScript a little bit, it's called TypeScript for a reason because it's going back to object-oriented style programming. We are now typing all of our variables and things like that, and I like it because it makes the code a lot more readable, and especially working with APIs, you can easily like create an interface and stick to that interface with those types without really worrying about getting stuck and not knowing what a variable type is and things like that. So we've got a bunch of different types here: Boolean, number, string, array, tuple, enum, any, void, null, and undefined is a type now, so that's cool. And then there's a few advanced types, they're called, but they're not really types. They're just combinations of types. So you can make a interface a number or string. So say I want to pass in a measurement of width. I can say 7 or 7 pixels or something like that. And it'll take either without giving you a type error. And anyone who's written Angular has probably gotten billions of type errors. Interface, you already heard me talk about that. It's basically a custom type. You're kind of just wrapping something in a name that has attributes within it. Let is another word you'll see a ton in TypeScript. It's different than var, and conveniently different than var because it's not visible outside the nearest containing block or for loop. So it's very strict in where it can be used. A little bit on the style guide. We thought John Papa's Angular 1 stuff really pushed a flatter structure. Well, Angular 2 is even flatter. Like when you generate a component from the CLI right out of the bat, like right off the gate, it out 4 files. You got a TypeScript file, a spec TypeScript file, HTML, and CSS or SCSS, whatever you're using. So right there in a folder, there's 4 files. Say you want 2 components, then you shouldn't nest everything. If it deals with the same feature, you're going to want that component to be within the root folder, just like the previous one was. So it gets a little complicated, but you got to walk the fine line between making your app easy to read when it comes to your folder structure and like over nesting. So kind of complicated there. Naming is pretty much the same, just a few different middle words there. You're still going to use whatever your file name is, .component or .service, and then your file extension. Hopefully you're using TypeScript. Another thing that kind of bothered me with it is you see a lot of demos and like little code snippets that use the template rather than template URL, and they're putting inline HTML into the TypeScript file. Don't do that. Even if it's like 1 line, keep it separate, because if you have another coder come in, it's a lot easier to add to a file that's already there rather than go make a file and go through all the crap that the original developer should have done. So always plan as if it's going to grow, not shrink, kind of is my logic to that. And then with that, move all the complex logic into services. This is something that should have happened back in Angular 1, but they never really made a big deal of it. Everyone just had to say, all right, this function is 150 lines long now. Let's try to slim it out. But keep your components small as possible, because they're not really reusable. Services are. Components themselves, yeah, you can put them in multiple places, but should be designed, as it says at the top, feature by feature. Something that kind of comes out in the Angular 2 style guide that has been like not really talked about up until now is tooling. Like more standards are kind of being set in what you see around the Angular community in terms of tools to use with Angular. VS Code, whether we like it or not, probably has the market share of IDE/text editor. And I think that's really taking over because of its native TypeScript support. It's just really convenient. Has your like click and go straight to your classes and things like that. Cool hover functionality on types. And I made the switch and changed a few themes over, and it's like I never stopped using Atom. So it's really up to the developer still though, but it seems like they're trying to get whole teams on board of using the same text editor or IDE. And as long as you're using that across your whole team, it doesn't matter what you use. The other thing that is kind of unique for Angular 2 is Angular Augury. It's nice because Google kind of owns Angular, you know. Came out with a cool extension called Augury, which just helps you troubleshoot and gives you like the component trees of your app and things like that. So definitely something worth checking out. I'll try to remember to dig into it.
Do we all use nowadays? Mostly still Atom.
I think we're mostly Atom. So I'm trying to get people to convert slowly. I don't think any back-end guys will, but
I will.
come on over. All right, we'll look into the CLI a little. I'll generate a project up here real quick. Josh, and if anyone else is on the call, if you want to follow along here, this will be one of the spots you can. And early on in the demo, you probably can follow along too, but then I'm going to copy and paste some code so that we can finish on time and not be here all day, and hopefully not. Let's see what Josh said.
Okay, that's good.
I just realized I wasn't in presentation mode. My bad. Alrighty. So if you have the CLI installed, the CLI is sick. Easy install, just what is it? npm install global Angular CLI. You can do specific version if you want, but it seems like they're working out kinks with every incremented version. So you probably want the most recent. So to kick off a new project, new Angular app, just do ng new, and then we'll call it CLI demo, and the name, and enter. And this might take a minute, but it'll create a scaffolded app for you. It's doing all the npm installs now. So if you create the app on your CLI and on your machine, there's no need to run npm install and no need to do any Bower. I don't think it comes out of the box with Bower dependencies anyway, but it'll all be installed right for you. And after this loads, we'll be able to run ng serve, and you'll see the awesome app works screen. With the CLI, you see here, you also get some convenient commands. ng generate does about everything you possibly need. Creates components for you, services, classes, anything. One of the differences that I forgot to mention with Angular 2 is filters aren't called filters anymore. They're pipes. So you can generate a pipe with the CLI. And then, like I said, ng serve will serve your app. ng test runs all the specs. Let's see if we're up. It should be soon. Doesn't take too long usually. What else? You can also edit, like manually configure your CLI. So if you want to use Sass and not have to manually change the file extensions, which is easy enough, you can go in there and say create CSS files instead of CSS, and change path locations and things like that as well. Of course.
Just the demo effect. Yeah, no. Come on, Colin.
I wanted to live install this so that we could kind of look into the code. There we go. All right, we're good. All right, let me open that up. So we'll open up the generated app to see what stuff is in here. So here's everything that was auto-generated by the CLI. Right out of the right away, we'll check out main TS. This is your like module folder, well, not module, but Angular 1. This is your root module here. It's setting up your project. You see this enable prod mode that uses a little bit of the AOT or ahead of time compilation that people are crazy about with Angular. But for us, it won't do anything, and you'll see a little log message in the console that says, hey, you're not using prod code. But the big line here is this bootstrap line. And all this is doing is saying, hey, this is my root module. So bootstrap that to my app, and then dig into app module. So here's where people love the dependency injection of Angular 2. You have to pretty much manually inject the CLI will do some for you. Like if you generate a component from the CLI, it will automatically create this import statement, which is nice, but it doesn't do it for services. So you still have to do it manually. So you kind of got to make a habit of checking different locations as you create stuff. Otherwise, you're just going to get the error that's like, hey, can't find this service, add it to your module. And the erroring is a little better, so you know where to go more quickly, but it still sucks having to go back to your app module every time you create a service. So you see this is bootstrapping app component to the app module. So immediately this will be the component that's loaded, more specifically this HTML. So in the component, we're assigning a title app works and just giving the app a header with the title. So if we ng serve this bad boy, let's put cd into it first. It's gonna just compile all the modules. It's quick now because there's only one module. As your program gets bigger, it will get bigger. Localhost 4200 is the default URL. Hey, app works. And to show that it's actually working, we can just change that. Well, we'll change it in here. And it has that live reload, which is nice for development. You do have to hit the URL to bring it up. It doesn't automatically bring up the browser window, but as you edit any CSS or any of the TypeScript files, it'll live reload. So that's basically what I wanted to show for just the CLI. We'll get into the demo now, as long as that works all right. I already have this installed, so hopefully nothing goes wrong. And I'll quickly go over some of the things that I added to speed things up to the starter. So here's our starter app. Take a look at our app module. And you see I have a lot more import statements than were in that auto-generated by the CLI. Some of the stuff here you're seeing, I'm importing the router, I'm importing, let's see, animations, I'm importing, all these modules are the Angular material modules. I've got a service here, a component, well, 3 components, and then we'll get into this router stuff later. I don't want you to pay too much attention to that now. And then the decorator, ng module decorator has all the declarations, imports, and providers in there. Still using app component as the bootstrap, so we're still going to run everything through here. And so we'll go to app component, check out what's in there. Same stuff. The only thing I really changed is what's being loaded. So you see, we'll look into this first. App navigation is up here as a new component. So let's look at that. All this is unnecessary. I could have easily built a navigation with static, like tabs and things like that, but I wanted to quickly run over a service. That way when I'm flying through it and copying, pasting code, we all know what's happening and we don't need to pause. But up here, where your import statements are, you grab the service that I built and a tab. So I'll show you what a tab is. It's pretty much a type. Down here, your selector, that's what you call the, where I'm blanking here. It's like an HTML selector. So you saw that in app component here, app navigation, app navigation. You should use that kebab case, you know, the dashes rather than underscores or anything like that. And then just one other thing to point out here is the SCSS. That comes as CSS. To change that, all you have to do is rename the file to SCSS and then add an S there. It doesn't take any manipulation of the compiler or anything like that. It'll do it automatically. All right. So up here, you see this tab, and we're importing a tab. So what is that? If you've used Java, you probably could have guessed what this was going to look like. All it is a simple class with a name and link. Both of those are strings. So in the component, we're saying in old Angular, this would be like VM tabs equals an empty array. But since we're using TypeScript, you have to give it a type. So we're saying VM tabs equals an empty array of tabs. All right. We'll try to explain this as best I can. So we'll look into the service next and see what that's really doing. Cool. It's just returning an array of names and links. And if I were to say, it would give me an error back on the response because this is not a tab. Return a promise, which I left everything as promise now because I didn't want to get into any RxJX or observables yet because that's the fun stuff. So we're just returning a promise of an array. So back in the component, this .navigation service .get tabs. Then you see this cool arrow function, and arrow function scared the hell out of me at first because I had no idea what it meant. But essentially all that's doing is saying, well, let's do it this way. This will look familiar. Pretty much just saying that really briefly. So it's taking the response of this .tabs and setting it to our this .tabs, which is this bad boy up here, the array of tabs that we created. And then ng on init is pretty self-explanatory. That's your immediately invoked function, but you do have to bring that in as an implementation on the component. So when this component gets loaded up, it's going to call this .tabs and get your tabs back. So we'll run the starter file to see what all that does real quick. Serve not start. Angular 2 is so fast.
Clearly.
I don't think I broke anything. That's the old one. There we go. All right, so all the nav component did was build this cool little nav bar. We can go back and check the tabs. We're getting timesheet and team. Cool beans. So, what's up?
I thought you were going to change that to Fuchsia.
It is, let me see. Deep purple amber theme.
Okay, I
Yeah.
guess, whatever.
All right, so back in app module, you saw that I had the router already set up. I love the Angular 2 router. It is UI router. They stole so much from UI router, but it makes it a lot easier. Like that's all they had to do. No one had a problem with UI router really.
Improved.
Yeah, improved. They did improve it because it comes out of the box now. But there is like infinity options to all your routes. Like you can set up, not ABAC, but you know, you can set up your authentication to do checks before and checks after loading the component, things like that. So it's really nice and simple. You can also move this. You should probably move this to a different file if you're building an actual app so that it's a little cleaner. You don't want your routes in your root app module. So let's create a component and put it on this team button. Should be pretty easy, but I'm all talk, so let's check it out. So you remember in the CLI overview, we looked at how to create components. ng C is just short for ng generate component. And then team, I think, is what we're going to call it. Yeah. So you see that creates a whole team folder. And component's kind of unique in that way that it creates a folder. If I did service and I wanted it rooted like in a nested folder, I would have to write out that folder and hit service. And then it would put my service within this team folder. So now we've got just a base component. All that's going to say is, hey, team works. So it's kind of nice. You can just plug it in and test it right away. So what we'll do now is say we want to add a route called team. Team component is created right for us. Don't need to do anything. And I think I remember I did not put, yeah, so we'll need to add team as the link here. And then all that's really doing, I'll show you the HTML, is putting the tab.link in the router link. So it's basically your href right there. And look at that. We have a working component. Whoa, right? Yeah. But it really is that easy, like, to get up and running. And then everything after that is not similar or the same to Angular 1, but that's the hard part, really, is getting your files where you need them and loading it on a screen. Once you have that, the service part is pretty simple. How are we doing on time?
Yeah, 2 hours left.
Okay, good.
50 minutes.
So we're going to build a service, try to build a service here. I am going to do a lot of copying over, otherwise it would take a while. Open. I'll load up what we want to build.
So when's the rest of this time sheet? Is this going to be done so that I can tell Bob?
I know, right? See, there's the hard part is authentication, actual HTTP endpoints.
I thought you said it was easy. You just got to put it in.
Yeah.
What was it? The,
HTTP.get. I wanted to go into some of that stuff, but I was worried I wouldn't have time. Turns out I would have. But I will totally like stay after or do a after work and learn at some point, and we can build a different app or something like that and go into actual HTTP endpoints and a little more in-depth routers and go into observables and NGRX and stuff like that. That's the hard stuff is kind of more fun with Angular 2, which is not the case for 1. But let's generate a service while we have this up and running or close to it. Let's do S there, but I'm not sure. So, and then we're gonna do a service in timesheet. So timesheet. Timesheet, but you want the service to be called. And there's our service files right within the timesheet folder. So what do we want this service to do? I'd say as a starter, that was not an open-ended question. I don't want to have to do anything I didn't sign up for. But let's just
Fill out my time sheet every day for me.
8 hours
8
on the
hours,
same,
yeah.
same project code.
Right.
Let's build a list of like charges or log entries. So this is my final. I'm going to cheat. And I've got a timesheet log here, you see. This is similar to the tab class that we built in the navigation component. All that's doing is formatting a log. Let's check out the service though. All we want to do in this for now is grab the log that we are going to build as a class. Import it, build an array of those logs, and then make a function that returns those logs as a promise. Right, simple enough. And we'll build that class real quick. This is like if you do ng generate class, it'll make it for you, but it just says export class, whatever you called it. That's it. Like it writes 3 words for you. So just as easy to go in and say yes. And there's our log file. You see that the import's being done right now. There was a little squiggly red line there before. So it's reading the log, and we set up timesheet service to return an array of logs that we just hard code in here. Remember back 10, 15 minutes ago, I said how services don't get automatically injected into app module. Use that. See here, you need to say timesheet service. And this is when VS Code comes in handy, because it is going to, like, not in time compile your code, but it does a lot more development time airing. So you see, I did not inject timesheet service up here. Adam wouldn't have told me that. Like, Adam with TypeScript wouldn't have told me that. I don't know what it is or why, but it's the airing is just not there yet. Import it real quick from timesheet. Okay. Now we should be good to go. I don't need that spec file. That. Log is done. So now we'll go into the component and call that function that we just built. So let's say get timesheet entries. TypeScript. That. Then all we're doing is calling the timesheet service that we injected above and get timesheet entries method in the service, and then doing that same kind of arrow function that we did in tabs, which is saying get the response and set it to this .log. Right there, you notice you don't have something injected. So your constructor here is essentially the top of your, what are they called in one? Now I can't even remember. A component in one is a, I'm about to have to open another project. What is it? Okay, well, it's like in the top where you're injecting your services in your old component files in Angular 1. That's all this is doing, except you're having to declare where, like, if it's global, is it private, is it unique to this component, and you want your services unique to this component. It shouldn't be public.
I think that's for dependency injection.
Yep. And we need to import timesheet service. I'm going to copy this because cool. Now we should be good. create the logs array, empty logs array. Tabs, logs equals an array of logs. A lot of times you'll see this. It's just saying logs is an array of logs and it's empty. Like you could say, I could have easily put that array, the array that we set in the service right in here, and it's going to do just fine. Service. Now the component's good to go. We'll add some HTML so that we can see what's posted. This is using a lot of Angular material. But I also added some CSS to it as well, so we'll copy that over.
So your CSS is scoped to your components now.
Yep, pretty neat. But in your component TS, you see it has a styles URL array. So if you wanted to add global styles, you could easily do that, and it actually gives you places to do some of that in like styles.css, and you can make your own and reference it. But that makes it super convenient, right? In like not having to worry about overwriting class names and things like that.
Or colliding with other people.
Yep. Definitely one of the big convenience things in Angular too. All right, I think I've got everything, so let's try it out. I have to rerun it. How long this one takes. Quickly, while that's loading up, you see why it's going straight to timesheet is just because I'm saying if it doesn't match a path, send it to timesheet. So unless it matches one of these exactly, it's going to hit timesheet. So that's like your automatic redirect right there.
Can you create like abstract classes in the router?
Yeah.
Or abstract class.
Oh yeah, yep, yeah. It's
How do you have
exactly
that
like
nested?
UI router in that. Yeah, makes it real nice. I forgot to show you guys as I was going over router how that's really getting injected, but I forget what it's called with UI router. It's like, you know, they have an identical thing to this where it's like put this somewhere in your HTML where you want the HTML of the active route to show up. And that's all router outlet is. It's just what the native router calls. What is it? I'm blanking on all this Angular 1 stuff now, but so that's where you see that. It's loading the top navigation and then whatever the router is currently on. All right, I saw it loaded up, but it's missing our table. So let's see what's going on. Let's see if we can find out what's going on. Let's check our service. Oh, I don't think we're getting the entries, are we? On init. Try this again. Cool. So you see our CSS is getting. It is. This is a front end workshop here at Altman. Probably because I put the CSS in the wrong place. So there's some random file getting. All right, cool. Now we've got a list of those charges that we built with some decent styling. The last thing we'll do, and then I'll stop talking, is just make an add. And all we're going to do for now is add it to that array. So as soon as you hit refresh, you're going to lose anything you added. But just to show the opposite way of passing data in. So we'll start from the back end forward and go from timesheet service. All we're going to do is add this add timesheet entry method. You see this is taking an input, and we're actually going to return an array of logs again, because I wanted to kind of mock what an HTTP service would be doing. So we're going to push a log up to the logs array, and then return the new logs array. That's all that function is doing. And then back up in the component, all we need to do is pretty much the same thing. You want add timesheet entry that takes entry details. Get void, because all it's doing is resetting a variable. This dot timesheet service, add timesheet entry, entry details. And then we're just going to copy this, because that's all we want to do again, is reset the logs array to the new output. That should be it. We'll double check our work. Yep, looks like it'll work. Reload here. Put some stuff in. We'll say training, Angular Summit. Yeah. Add time. Hey, look at that. We're good to go. Who said it wouldn't work?
You didn't clear it out.
Oh, I know. I was thinking of that. I knew it right away. We just ran into this on Agora by an input not clearing. So I can just accidentally add that 5 times. But you see how it's pretty simple to go back and forth from your service to your component once you have everything set up right. I mean, yes, we're only working with an in-memory array and stuff like that, but your HTTP services are going to be the same way. Like, it's just rather than get. I'll say the hardest thing to get used to is not using what you used to use, because it comes to your mind first. Like, you should use TypeScript and ES6 with the arrow functions and things like that better. Like, not because it is new and that's what people are doing, but that's why it's all been created, and that's why Google is using it together. It's not just for, shits and gigs. This is 1 line of code that would have been 3 in an old, at least 3 lines of code in an old Angular project. I know some of this stuff is probably not, best practice, but you got to work through really getting used to putting types back in to your JavaScript code. That's another kicker and Yang, as you pointed out, some of the dependency injection stuff that is not familiar to an Angular 1 developer is like, you have to backtrack. Like, a lot of times I just put it in the component and then it's like, okay, but it's not in the module and it's not in the root.
Yeah, it's a dependency hierarchy.
Yep. So while we're in here, and before I forget, I'll show you augury. It just gets put right on the development console here. And you see it's kind of neat. This is like the elements pane, except it's component based. So you see I've got the app component is the whole thing. You got a navigation component that's currently loaded, router outlet, and it doesn't know what the hell to do with that for some reason. And then your timesheet component based on where you wanted that to show up on the screen. That's convenient for making sure that you're not accidentally loading anything within the routers that shouldn't be loaded. You can always check your tree. Kind of cool visual here. Not really sure what I'm supposed to use this for, but it's awesome. And then modules is just a huge list of everything that's getting imported pretty much. So you see app module is obviously going to be huge, and this
Do you know if you can lazy load your modules? Lazy load your services?
Well, it was probably going to be behind the scenes. You can set up like factory functions.
Yep.
You can create instances and stuff like that.
Yeah, and a few things I haven't looked into yet, which I know are selling points for Angular 2 is the AOT. That's ahead of time compilation. I think use mobile much here, so it might not be useful for us at all. But that's one of the big selling points for large app developers, I'd say. Worth looking into. The other thing, like I said, state managers are more popular in Angular 2. Redux is the React version, and NGRX is just Redux wrapped for Angular. Saw an awesome talk on that at the summit, and it just blew my mind. Like, it's hard to grasp the concept and to build a problem statement for having to use that. Like, there's so much development overhead. State manager, but if you did, development so much easier, and there's tooling for NGRX that's just like incredible. You can go in, use the app, and if something goes wrong, you can timeline back, and it just like, it's literally time travel within your app, so you can replay the same error over and over again. It's pretty neat until you find out what's wrong. Back to resources that GitHub. Unfortunately, I couldn't get like the PowerPoint presentations because they were kind of crazy about that stuff, but I took decent notes on most of the stuff I went to. TypeScript documentation, Angular docs. The Angular 2 docs are a lot better than Angular 1, but they're still being worked. Like, you'll go to some sections of TypeScript or JavaScript Angular docs, and it'll just say like, not ready yet. It's built, but they can't document it apparently. Style guide. Angular has officially adopted John Papa's style guide. So you'll see on his like GitHub repo that everyone used to look to, it's now just right on the Angular website. ngdoc.io, I just found this like a week or 2 weeks ago, but it's open source Angular documentation. And there's like tutorials on how to do stuff and things like that. And it's totally open source, so you just sign in with your Google account and you can put something up there. It's like a non-angry person Stack Overflow. Like, people are much more welcoming there. Demo code is up on my GitHub, and Angular has an official starter app as well. And then if you're looking through their documentation, they have a tutorial, Heroes or something, Angular 2 Heroes, and it's pretty decent. A lot of the stuff that I did in my demo is taken from there. So as I was looking through it, like, they didn't have a constructor on their classes, and I thought you needed a constructor, but they didn't use one, so I didn't use one, and it worked fine. So I think if you're reading through docs, it goes in order of like your maturity level. Careful. Honestly, might want to scroll down a bit before reading, because you can accidentally read a non-best practice. I think starting, if you knew Angular 1 or kind of know Angular 1, you should start with the style guide, not the docs. And it'll give you much more information than the first 5 pages or 5 scrolls of the docs would. I've got the start and finish up on my GitHub, so feel free to pull down the finish and add to it and then send it to Chris Bach. That's about it for me though. Any questions that I might be able to answer, or Minter might be able to answer?
Is anybody using this in production?
Not here. Well,
We have an Angular 2 app, but it's just like using the older version of Angular 2. One thing I have noticed looking at this is like stuff like the tooling is greatly improved, and like building like your app module and stuff used to be a lot more complicated.
Yeah, I think that's a byproduct of the CLI.
Is anybody in the industry using it in production?
Yeah, I was surprised when, so there's like two types of, Angular now, Angular 2+ development that's going on, and it's either like Greenfield started with Angular 2 or a huge project that's Angular 1 that wants to migrate and is really looking into if it's worth it. And at the conference, it was kind of sad, but a lot of people took away that it's not worth it, that it's too much work to transition a massive application.
Just do it.
That's kind of because like if you type in a question on Google,
Yeah.
Angular 1.x is going to be the response that comes up. It's hard to find questions in Angular 2 still. So I think another 6 months to a year, and that's going to start to shift the opposite way. But it's definitely still getting adopted. But like Mentor said, the tooling is starting to like pass up the framework itself. Like it's really good. People are starting to get used to TypeScript.
Well done.
Josh, did I lose you? Yeah,
That's a yes.
I legit lost him. Look at the inception of the screen.